Hey everybody, Riot Mort here, and Into the Arcane has been out for 3 weeks. The Americans had their Thanksgiving holiday, and it is time for our first patch of Into the Arcane, patch 1424. It's also the last patch of the year, which is pretty cool. So yeah, and the other crazy thing about this patch is there's a lot coming. It's a pretty big patch because the Arcane show is over, so we're adding things like the 6 costs, and this is the patch that the Macau Open will be played on. So this patch happens on Wednesday, and the Macau Open is on Friday, which should be pretty interesting. Should be a lot of fun, healthy competition. But like I said, there's a lot of changes here, so let's talk about them and dive right in. The first thing is big change to the Anomaly system. We launched, and what we found is that if players were able to store up 60 gold, they could force certain anomalies. This really kind of went against the spirit of what we were trying to go for. So we made a pretty light change to the system, which is just that it's now possible to see repeats. So if you want to dig deep for like 30 gold, 40 gold, you still can, but just be aware you aren't guaranteed to see the thing. So generally in this regard, you probably want to pick 3 or 4 anomalies that you could be comfortable taking and then go deep. But this really goes more to the spirit of what anomalies are supposed to be. Pretty light change. You're probably not going to see any repeats in your first few rerolls, but the deeper you go, the more likely you are to see those repeats, so just be careful. So, yeah. Loot orbs containing multiple units or anvils can now be partially opened if you have the space for some, but not all the units inside. This is a really painful thing sometimes, and it was causing some bugs. But like, let's say the thing had 4 champions inside and you only had 3 bench slots. You couldn't open it, and it was like, clear your bench, and you're like, I can't, I need to save this stuff. Now you can partially open it, get the results, and then, sell those 3 things and open the last one. So should be nice. Prismatic orbs. We made one small change to prismatic orbs. There was one of the drops that would give 2 champ duplicators and 30 gold. That one's gone. You can't drop that one anymore. In its place, you can get a 6-cost champion, an artifact anvil, and an item remover. So this is a pretty fun one to drop because you get like an early Warwick or an early Victor plus an artifact anvil. So it can be pretty fun, and being able to anomaly those are pretty interesting. So yeah. And then the last one is just a really nice quality of life. We've been testing it on PBE. It feels a lot better. But component combining through the hover on the new UI has been sped up to the point where it's actually pretty nice to use now. So yeah, cool. All right. And then the big one here, 6-cost champions have appeared. So the way 6 costs work, starting at the Anomaly, 6-cost champions have a chance to appear in your shop. That is independent of level. It has nothing to do with your level. That chance goes up each round. So the longer the game goes, the higher that chance it goes. And that is increased when you hit level 10. If you hit level 10, you are more likely to see them. Stage 7 also, they show up a lot more in stage 7. But there you go. These are very rare. You may not see one every game, but, usually there's probably at least one person in the lobby who has one. And then to give you an idea about what these are, a 1-star 6 cost is about on par with a 2-star 4 cost, give or take. They have a lot more utility, though, so they end up usually doing less damage than a 2-star 4 cost, but they have a lot of utility. So, and let's go over these real quick. First off is going to be the one that's probably the most popular here, which is Victor. Victor has Machine Herald, which converts all mana, attack speed, and attack damage into AP. So you can put a Deathblade on him. But what that means is Shojin isn't good on him because he can't generate mana. Like, you cannot accelerate his cast. His cast is locked in, and it's going to happen around 9 seconds into combat, and again around 28 seconds into combat, give or take. You can't make him cast quicker. It's impossible. You can just give him lots and lots of power, though. His passive is his auto attacks are a death ray that shreds, deals a little bit of true damage, but the shred and the sunder is the big value here. So like if you didn't build Last Whisper or Ionic Spark, Victor will provide that. And then his active is the coolest spell in the game. It's a big map-wide AoE stun that lifts up all enemies for 2 seconds and then slams them down, dealing some of their health as damage. Really good utility. Like I said, I put Victor in every comp I can find him in. The champ's really, really good. So, yeah. Then there's Warwick. Warwick's passive is he will devour enemies that drop below 12% health. which heals him for 400 health and granting him 50 mana. And he can do this with any range. So for example, like let's say your Maddie snipes their backline down to below 12%. He'll dash away and eat them, which is really nice. His mana bar is 100, so if he gets 2 of those, he's right back to full mana, which is nice. And then his active is he becomes Blood Frenzied. Blood Frenzy is a unique state for him where he's basically moving faster, has Omnivamp, attack speed, and is constantly just going rah, 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 rah. Pretty cool. The interesting thing about Warwick is he is a experiment. So experiment now has another thing to play. His experiment bonus here is on kill, stun enemies adjacent to dead target for 1 second. I'm not a big fan of his experiment bonus per se, but I like giving him other experiment bonuses like Mundo's. So that works out pretty well. The other thing is to get your expectations in mind, Warwick is not going to top your meters a lot, but the amount of healing he can do between the Omnivamp and the Blood Hunter can be a lot. So if you give him some pretty, like Titans is really good on him. You can have him actually be pretty tanky and pretty durable, which is pretty nice. So yeah, he's probably the hardest of the 6 costs to use though. My shot call here is that he will be the least popular and players will be asking for him to be buffed, but we'll see. And then there's Mel. Mel is the Banished Mage. And the way Mel works is Mel has a 40 mana cost. Her spell, she'll dash to a nearby hex, gain a shield on herself and 2 nearby allies, and then 50% of the damage blocked by those shields is stored. So let's say she casts those shields and everyone takes the damage. That's 900 stored, or excuse me, 450 because 50% of that. And then she also shoots a bunch of shots. Every third cast, she does a bunch of damage plus the stored damage. So if her shields are effective, she does more damage. She sort of converts that back, which is pretty cool, into a big AoE cast. So she's definitely a blue buff plus Nashers plus AP item that can be really fun. Now, the thing about her passive here is if she has cast 12 times since you got her, so you can't just buy her and throw her in and get this, but if you got her to cast 12 times, at that point, she'll protect you. And so if you ever drop below 1 player health, she saves you, sort of a last stand. When she does that, she also gains 10% damage amp, which makes her even stronger. So she's pretty cool. Does require items to do well, but it doesn't quite have as much utility as, say, Victor, but generally can do a little bit more damage and pretty fun. And like I said, having that last stand to protect you can be pretty nice. So there you go. There's our 6 costs. All right, encounters. There are also 4 new encounters this patch. Victor's Vision is probably the craziest. It makes 6 costs appear a little earlier, starting on stage 4-1. And then after the Anomaly, they're 3 times as likely to appear in your shop. So if you see the Victor Vision encounter, you're going to see a lot more 6 costs than normal. Mel's Aid. This is basically the Divine Blessing, the Stimmy, if you will. You get powerful loot when you're at 40 health. This one's back. Warwick's Hunger. We've done variations of this one before as well. But basically, it's like everyone gets Spoils of War. So when you kill an enemy champion, Warwick will occasionally devour the body and leave loot behind. So you kind of get that bonus gold for kills. Really good for win streak stuff. And then back by popular demand, Jace's Artifacts. Everyone starts with an Artifact Anvil. So we know players have been having fun with the artifacts. There's now an encounter where you start with an Artifact Anvil. Some other minor adjustments here. Scuttle Crabs are now painted to look like Scuttlebutt. Cool. Jinx no longer dances for the Crab Rave encounter. Sag. Powder's Wind-Up Monkey is disabled in Hyper Roll. Didn't really need you taking 10 damage in Hyper Roll. Yes, that has happened on live. It's, I'm sorry. And it no longer deals double damage in Double Up. So, yeah. Cool changes there. If you're curious about what the drop rates of encounters now, I'll leave this up on the screen for a second. I'm not going to read these all off. But basically, stuff like Vander went down a little bit. A couple of the Heimerdinger ones went down. I think even some of the Jinx ones went down a little bit. But basically, to make sure that we had room... Oh, Powder went down a pretty chunk. To make sure we had room for Jace and Victor and Mel and Warwick. But these are the percentages for you. So, there you go. All right, traits. On the trait side, Academy. Academy took people a little while to learn. It's pretty hard to play. It's really good in the early game where you get a bonus item, so we're not buffing 3 or 4 Academy, but 5 and 6 Academy just needed a small nudge to make sure they're worth it. So they're going to get a bump up here, getting an extra 1% damage amp and health if you use those sponsored items. So Academy ends up getting to be a bit stronger here. Ambusher. Everyone loves a good Camille comp. So Ambusher is actually getting burfed, if you will. It's getting nerfed at 4 and 5 to do less critical strike damage, 10% less critical strike damage at 5, 5% less at 4. So small nerf to Ambusher. We don't want to nerf the trait too much, but we're actually buffing it a little bit at 2, 3, and 4 for the critical strike chance, just to make sure that it's a little more consistent and you don't like lose a fight to a little RNG, but it's only 5% critical strike chance. Not a big deal. Overall, if you're looking at like Camille comps, the Ambusher trait as a whole probably feels nerfed here because 5 is losing that 10% critical strike damage. Artillerist. 4 and 6 aren't really as popular. 6 in particular, considering it needs 2 emblems. So they're going to get a small nudge here of 5% more AD and 10% more AD, respectively. So definitely should be a bit better combined with some of the other buffs the champs are getting. Automata. This is going to be a pretty big buff here. It's going to look a lot bigger than it is on paper. The bigger buff here that you should actually be scared about is the armor and MR. The armor and MR is a pretty big chunk here, right? Going from 20 to 25, not a big deal. 50 to 70, that's pretty nice. An extra 20 armor and MR. And then if you have 6, like 150 armor and MR is like 6 Sentinel levels of tankiness. So that's really good. The base damage of the proc, though, this is the number that I think people are looking at, and it's like, those are big numbers, 800 to 1200. They don't actually proc that much, and this doesn't buff the 25% damage share part of it, so I'm less worried about that side of the buff and more the armor and MR. That being said, we have seen on PvE that this should hopefully make 6 Automata playable, so hopefully that makes it a trait that you're worthy of actually considering, so sweet. Conqueror, small nudge to 2 Conqueror here, nothing crazy. 2 Conqueror, kind of a fake trait. You really use it to get like 2 gold in the early game and then maybe move out of it unless you're going 4 Conqueror. So it's going to get a small nudge here, help you get that 2 gold quicker. Sorcerer, 6 and 8, probably one of the less good traits right now on live. It's going to get 10 more AP at each. My honest read is this doesn't really solve all of Sorcerer's problems, but who knows, if you have a really good Sorcerer line, maybe this at least makes them a little more playable. Black Rose. Black Rose, definitely the most popular trait by far here. So definitely getting some changes here. If you get 4 Black Rose early in stage 2 or 3, it will have less health. From there, though, 4 Black Rose isn't really a problem. It's fine. We're kind of happy with that. 5-piece, though, this is where it gets a little nutty. A 5-piece Scion now heals for his missing HP rather than always setting his HP to max. The big thing this does, by the way, is this means anti-heal affects him. You can actually put anti-heal on him to have Scion heal for less. So this should be a nerf to how much that Scion can heal for. And then in addition, we've nerfed his HP at pretty much every level. So 5-piece is going to go down quite a bit. Like I said, stage 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 5 Black Rose will not be as strong as it is on live. It's still pretty handy. It's still pretty flexible. I don't think this makes 5 Black Rose out of the meta. If you're somebody who's like tired of seeing 3 Scions, maybe you'll see 2 now. It's still a good trait, but it will be less good than it is. And then 7-piece actually is a little underperforming, hilariously enough. So 7-piece is going to get a little bit more of its health on revive, allowing it more time and just be a little tanky. That's about it. So 7 Black Rose gets to be better. Chem Baron. Chem Baron is in a really good state in the sense that it's like powerful, and if you can hit 500 or more, it ends up doing well. It's just a little too hard to play without a high roll of like a target dummy or golem with an emblem or an emblem start or anything like that. So we want to make sure just like having the 3-piece or the 4-piece makes it a little bit more tempting to play. So 3, 4, and 5 are going to get +5 on their lost streak for their shimmer. Don't think that changes too much. And then to stay in Chem Baron, they're going to get more health per armory passed. So if you get like a 400 or 500 cash out and then stay in like 6 Chem Baron, that's still an extra 640 health for your team. It's pretty nice. One small nerf here, Perfected Shimmer Bloom. I'm sure you've seen some of the videos where they get like lots of procs and have instantly 1,000 AP. Little more than we intended. So it now has a cooldown of 1 second so that you can't just make it go insane. But still should be very, very powerful. And then a tiny text change is the recommended users of the illegal items are now at the bottom instead of at the top of the text. So small buff to Chem Baron, TLDR. On the small side, Enforcer 10 no longer confiscates items from non-champions. It's almost actually amazing the number of reports I got of 10 Enforcer stole my Golem's emblems. Definitely more than 20 reports of this directly to me, which was pretty interesting. But that's not a problem anymore. That's fixed. Enforcer 10 also just no longer confiscates emblems. We don't need it to disable your traits before the fight starts. So there you go. Family. After activating Family 5, heist progress becomes visible at the bottom of the tooltip. Cool. Pit Fighter 8, definitely overperforming for what it is. Doesn't need to be this good for +2 emblems for a level 8 comp. So the true damage and the percent heal is going down. It's still going to have like a 2.5 average finish or whatever. It's just a little less powerful than it is. And then Rebel gets the world's tiniest nudge. All we're doing is changing when it activates from 20% missing health to 25% missing health. Still the same power, still the same stun duration, very tiny. But 10 Rebel was actually way too good for what it is. It's supposed to be on 10 Portal levels of power, not 10 Eldridge levels of power. So the retrigger timer is getting nerfed pretty hard here. So, yeah. Okay, one cost champions. Pretty straightforward here. Morgana, Trundle, Zyra, all kind of weaker on the one cost side. They're getting buffed. That's it. Pretty simple. Morgana will do a little bit more damage. It's like a 5% buff. Zyra's secondary waves will do more damage. She does plenty to the primary, but the secondary will do more damage. Cool. And Trundle will heal a little bit more, allowing for Bruiser and Scrap to be a little bit better in the early game. Cool. On the small side, Draven's tooltip has been reworded to better explain that he doesn't need IE for his axes to critically strike. Cool. Powder gets a very slight nudge, mostly at 1 star, and then 2 star, a little less at 3 star, percentage-wise, to try to just make sure that like the people who are trying to play backline Powder can do well. Also compensates for some of the ambusher changes. We don't want Powder to be unplayable. There's probably some work to be done here to make sure that backline is more playable than frontline, but what can you do? And Vex 3 gets a pretty big buff here. 10% buff for Vex 3, so that if you get Vex out of a worth the wait box, you don't feel like you lose. So, cool. Camille. Yeah, she's a little strong. Our read on her before we launched was that 1 and 2 star were strong and that 3 star might struggle. It did not struggle. It killed everything. It murdered everything and killed everything. So we're nerfing her healing from 40% to 33%. We're nerfing her damage lightly at 1 and 2 star. So 240 to 230. Heavily at 3 star from 300 to 260. And we're lowering the AP portion by half almost. This is for the Hodge AP that she was getting, any Titans AP she was getting. She'll benefit less from those. Now, if you're looking at this plus Ambusher plus any other changes and going, wow, they've killed Camille, balance thrashing. No, we didn't. She's fine. She's playable. It's fine. So, it's fine. We were off by this much. It's fine. Nocturne. Nocturne has been struggling except with artifacts. And so Nocturne will get a bit of a buff here to his attack speed. I think this will make Nocturne pretty playable. And if you have Fishbones and Sniper's Focus, he'll be really, really, really good. So definitely some cool Nocturne builds out there now that will be a little bit better. Renata getting a pretty chunky buff here, close to 10% here. It's like an 8% buff. But Renata will now be doing some damage here. From what we've seen on PBE, this actually makes Renata kind of playable, which is kind of nice to see. And then speaking of things that are also getting a little bit more playable, Tristana combined with the Artillerist buff. Expect to see some reroll Tristanas in your game now, hopefully. with her big giant cannonballs. Those will do a lot of damage. So yeah, see how many stacks you can get up to. And then finally Ziggs. Ziggs gets a very light buff to his primary damage and a little bit to his mini bomb damage. But hopefully this makes Ziggs a little bit more exciting as well. So like I said, 4 buffs, 1 nerf here so far. Akali. So it's not that Akali really needed the nerf heavily, but the problem was we had to buff all the other quick strikers, Nocturne, Ambessa, and Tips Twisted Fate, you'll see later. And Akali 3 was actually outside of her framework. The normal scaling here would be about 540, 550. So we decided to just put her back to normal framework scaling as kind of the nerf so that we weren't just over buffing Quick Striker here. So Akali does kind of pay the price so that we could buff the other champions. Vander's tooltip has been reworded to better explain that his ability can't crit without spell crit. So if you want Vander to crit, you're going to need an IE. And then Zeri gets a really light touch here. What we don't want to do is have everyone who is playing Cog now play Zeri and just go, it's the same comp. But Zeri is in a weird spot where, like, typically if you're playing Firelight, you're re-rolling Scar and Cog. So she doesn't really have a great identity. That being said, if you get one early with the Ginsus, you should feel good about it. And so kind of a light nudge here. We'll see if that works out. All right, 3 cost. Probably one of the more interesting changes here. I think Blitzcrank right now is probably one of the least purchased champions. Doesn't really have an amazing place. People aren't really excited to use him. Well, we're buffing his shield. And remember, we also have the Automata buff. So Blitzcrank actually kind of going to be a beast next patch. Should be able to tank, use that Dominator scaling to tank even more. So hopefully that gets Blitzcrank into the playable line. Gangplank. This is the melee form Gangplank, who basically sees no play. Wasn't happy with the design here, so I've asked it to be removed. No longer cleanses negative effects on cast. This did some really gross things when it was working. For example, it would cleanse all Malzahar dots, and it would cleanse anti-heal, and then heal himself. It did some pretty unhealthy things for the game. He just, like, hard countered specific comps completely. I don't like that. So now he won't be a hard counter, but to compensate, his spell damage is going up a pretty chunky amount here. My read is I don't think this makes him like S tier or anything like that, but should make him a little stronger if you have him early. Maybe actually consider the melee form. So Loris gets a pretty big buff here. 10 mana off his spell to let him cast more often, and then plus 25 on the shield. Not really that big a buff, but hopefully gets Loris along the same lines as other 3 costs. Speaking of which, Scar, the secret terror of the Kog'Maw comp, his mana cost is going to go down. And then the big thing is he just did a lot of damage. Like for a tank that also healed constantly and dashed around, that spell did a lot of damage. So we're hitting the spell pretty hard here because damage isn't really what he should be doing anyway. And then at 1 star, he's actually getting a light buff to his heal because he's not really that good at 1 star. 2 star stays the same, and then 3 star, very light nerf to his heal. So, yeah. And then Twisted Fate, another 3 cost that kind of hasn't really found his place here. Again, Quick Striker buffs we had to be careful of, and then Enforcer, it's like him and Loris getting buffed and Caitlyn getting buffed, so you got to be careful. But that being said, is still going to be doing a little more with his yellow card damage. That's the single target, so he can burst someone down. And then providing a little more utility to his team with the heal. To help those Quick Strikers stay alive. So, yeah. On the small side, Kog'Maw is like the champion with the weirdest shape again for 2 sets in a row now. Kog'Maw is like disgusting in stage 2 and 3. Really, really good. And then actually kind of falls off a cliff pretty much. Unless you hit all the cap, then he can start to win games. That being said, we also nerfed Scar. So that hurts his main build. We did buff Automata, though. So basically, we gave him the world's lightest slap on the wrist at 1 and 2 star here to slow him down just a little bit. Because, again, we want Kog'Maw to be fun. He's supposed to be like one of those easy-to-play carries that you slap a Ginsu's on and you have a good time. So we don't want to take him out of the meta or anything. But, yeah, kind of had to balance around that. So Smeech gets plus 2 AD. This is to help Ambusher a little bit. Again, it's funny. If you look at Camille and Smeech, and you have a 3-star of each, which one's better? Usually the Camille. Don't get me wrong, to win the game you need the Camille and the Smeech, but like you still kind of need the Camille more. Smeech should be more exciting. So Smeech is getting plus 2 AD, very light buff. And then Swain. Honestly, we probably need to go harder here at some point, but the idea here is that 1-star Swain in the early game, pretty nutty. Like, he'll heal a lot, and no one really has the damage to slow that down. So he can do a lot of work here. So we're lightly tapping that, like world's tiniest nerf here. But at 3-star, he actually kind of falls over a cliff. He barely survives that much. So we're giving him a little bit more heal and a little bit more heal per second. Hopefully to help stuff like, you know, the Form Swapper reroll, the Sorcerer line. Again, do I think this is going to make Sorcerer line playable? But it should nudge it. So, all right, 4 costs. Ambessa, underperforming a little, not heavily though. And the thing is, she's also an Emissary and a Quick Striker, so I had to be careful. But gets 10 off her mana, so she can cast more often. And her Slam gets a pretty chunky 12% buff or so. So her Slam will actually feel a little more satisfying. Should be more worthy of investing in. Cool. Mundo. This is a weird change. Probably the hardest one to explain. This is not meant to be a buff or a nerf on the aggregate, but individual cases certainly got buffed and individual cases certainly got nerfed. Basically what we did was we took, for both his spell heal and his damage, we took some out of the health scaling and put it back into the baseline. So at neutral, like if you have 0 item Mundo, this is a buff. He is healing more and doing more damage. But if you had a 6 bruiser Mundo, this is a nerf. This is a pretty heavy nerf. You're going to be healing a lot less. But if you have a Dominator Mundo, this is a buff. You're going to be healing more if you get to that 2nd and 3rd cast. So basically this is just us shifting power away from him, especially from Bruiser Mundo. Bruiser Mundo will still be good, but it didn't need to be quite as good as it was before. And then into things like Dominator and some AP items and stuff like that. So again, overall, a bit neutral, but his highest highs are nerfed and his other cases are better. So Garen quickly became sort of the, and if you go back and look at that clip where I explained the meta and I'm like, Garen's fine. Yeah, I was wrong. Garen's not fine. Garen's was too good. In particular, I'll admit, I didn't realize his Emissary bonus worked on himself, which is weird, but it just made the value of every Warmogs on Garen just disgusting, because it's basically 3x 20%, like pretty nutty. We still want Garen to be pretty strong, especially in like a Watcher comp and anything, but I don't think he needed that much value of just like free HP for the team. Woohoo! So Emissary is getting nerfed all the way from 20% to 12%. This is a big, big nerf to that in particular. So yeah, that should be healthy. Heimerdinger. This is probably, if you look at all the changes, I'm sure there are people out there going, Heimerdinger didn't need nerfed. It was secretly Malzahar. Heimer got a pretty light nerf here. This is actually mostly to compensate for Academy. He was just too much power in Academy right now. And so we wanted to just pull a little bit out of him. He can still do a lot of damage with like the blue buff and stuff like that. But again, he got off pretty lightly here. Just tiny nerf to Heimerdinger. Vi is another one that was really struggling. So Vi gets a pretty big buff here. A little more spell shield, a little more damage on the main target punch, and a little more slam AD. So Vi hopefully maybe should be worth putting items on this patch. That's the hope. So yeah. On the small side, Corki, 63 AD was a weird number, and he gets a buff, plus Artillerist, by the way. Now he's at 65 AD. So hopefully this plus 2 AD combined with the changes, combined with everything else, Corki should be a good 4-cost carry. Neat. Amazing. All right, 5-cost. Caitlyn, 80 to 82 AD. Yes, we keep using these tiny numbers to do very light changes because Caitlyn didn't need 5 more AD. That would have been too much. And then in addition, the bombs just were not very satisfying. So the bombs are going to get a bit more damage here, go from 150 to 180. That's a pretty big buff, actually. It's like a 20% buff to the bomb damage. It's not a 20% to her whole spell or anything, but like if you clump against Caitlyn, you might actually find yourself getting like bombed out, especially like a Caitlyn 2 with IE can do some pretty good damage. So cool. Jace, very light buff here, about 10% to melee form's main target damage. He just kind of knocked people around and wasn't really killing them. So if you want to invest items in him, he'll do a little bit more. It's pretty tiny. Malzahar. Look, on the one hand, I love Malzahar. On the other hand, he's the scourge of this patch, and everyone's pretty tired of Malzahar 1 dealing 10,000 damage and destroying teams. The dot with infinite duration is definitely something we'll learn from. That being said, he's still a 5 cost, and he still is supposed to be impressive. 5 costs are supposed to be impressive. I just think everyone's a little sick of him from this meta. He is getting a very large nerf here. He's going to take 5 more for his mana, so it'll take him a little while to cast. And then the spell is almost a 20% nerf here. Basically is a 20% nerf. So 20% plus mana. This is like a 25% nerf to Malzahar. Pretty big nerf. That being said, he's probably where he's supposed to be now. He's like a 5 cost that dots people and does damage. Cool. And then finally, Rumble. Rumble, there's just 2 small nerfs to 2 of his buffs. Flamethrower will do a little bit less damage, and Self-Destruct will do 20% less damage. Self-Destruct in particular, especially in like a 6 Sentinel comp, was doing kind of nutty amounts of damage, so a little bit of a nerf there. On the small side, Jinx 3 does more damage. Cool. Yeah, Jinx 3, great. And then Savika. If you ever got Savika to hit the jackpot, it's pretty rare, but where she like stands there and coins are flying out of her, it's pretty rare. But when you do, you're supposed to feel good about it, not go, why isn't she killing anything? Why is nothing dying? She was just doing too little damage. So we're doubling the damage of the jackpot AD so that you get all those coins and things will actually die and the jackpot should feel like a jackpot. Great. Okay. Items. Bramble Vest, still a little weaker than we'd like it, plus 2% more bonus health. Great. Hodge. The new rework to Hodge has been great. I think it has made the item incredibly flexible and fun to play. It works great on people who have crit. It's just nice on things like Quick Strikers and Melee, where it's like, cool, you get AD and AP when you need it, and it switches to more Omnivamp when you need it. That being said, Bloodthirster is 20% Omnivamp. Hand of Justice did not need to be 30%. That's too much. So we're nerfing it to 24, 12 baseline, 24 max. This does not kill the item. Anyone who thinks this kills the item, you're being silly. If anything, this makes the item fair and still incredibly flexible. So, cool. Luden's underperforming a little bit, so Luden's gets plus 5 AD and AP. Silvermere Dawn overperforming a little bit. We're taking off 15 of the armor and MR. Everyone loves Silvermere Dawn Violets and Camille's, so at least maybe now you'll kill them. And then Suspicious Trenchcoat has been really strong on melee champions for a while, so it's going to get a little less health on split and 10% less attack speed. It'll still be a very good item. This is, again, just like nerfs where we can get it, but like it's still going to be a very good item. So, okay, we're like halfway there. Augments. There are new augments and augment changes. I'm just going to go through fast. I'm not going to talk about them all too much. Delayed Start was an augment that was meant to be there at launch. We've turned it on. It's a silver augment. Sell your board and bench. Gain 4 random 2-star 1-cost champions. Disable your shop for the next 3 rounds. It's a fun little AFK-like augment. Cool. Aurelia Hero Augment gets buffed. Cool. Crafting. 1 less reroll. Pretty big nerf. This might make the augment bad now, ? But it certainly was too good before. Dummify. This gives us a lever where it now gains 250 health per stage. Realistically, this doesn't change Dummify much, but again, it just gives us a balance lever, which is nice to have. Health is Wealth now only grants 8 gold and no longer counts healing done to non-champions. Just small exploits here. I hope this works. This was the Powder Hero Augment. Well, it didn't. It didn't work, so it's gone. Goodbye, Augment. Mad Chemist. This augment's overperforming a little bit. People figured this one out. This is probably the best hero augment in the game right now. So we're nerfing the damage a pretty healthy amount here, a little like 15%. So it needed a nerf. Pumping Up. This is only the base attack speed, so it's like a 2 attack speed nerf. Not really a big deal. Support Mining and Support Mining Plus. This is a pretty big nerf here. So the amount of deaths required to get these goes down from like 9 to 7. but the reward goes from a support anvil to a random support item. For a silver augment, letting you pick your support item was way too good. This is a nerf that it needed. So you're just going to get a random support item. So if you get the one you don't want, is what it is. New augment table scraps. This is one that was on PBE and we had to disable because it was too good. And then we had to fix the text. Now it says, after the next 4 carousels, gain 1 unit that was not taken, and its item gain 1 gold. This used to work for the entire game, and so if you survived, it would be like full items worth of values. It was pretty insane. So, yeah. And then trolling gets a light buff. I don't think this buff does too much, but the mana reduction from Trundle goes from 40 to 50. Lastly, Patience is a Virtue is now exclusive from Fire Sale, so we don't have to deal with that issue anymore. And then just a text note that Recombobulator now has a max tier of 5. No, you cannot recombobulate 6 costs. All right, gold. First new augment, Betrayal. This is where Maddie and Ambessa work together. We had to wait to ship this because it was a spoiler. But Maddie always targets Ambessa's target with her ability and attacks every round where either gets at least 2 kills, gaining Maddie. This one's interesting because you can actually get like Maddie 4 off of it if you play it right, which is kind of cool. And with Ambessa being really strong now, if you have an Enforcer emblem start, this is a great augment. Pretty fun augment. Give it a try. Experiment Crest. Now that Warwick is around, we are adding the augments for Experiment Crest. So gain an Experiment emblem and an Urgot. Cool. Academic Research has been re-enabled after the bug fix. Cool. All That Shimmers. This is a big nerf, but it's been needing it for a while. All That Shimmers no longer increases the interest cap to 7. It's just get a gold generating artifact. Cool. Balanced. Arcane Retribution. This is the sorcerer augment that you probably shouldn't be picking anyway. Now gives a Lux and a Vladimir. This one's really hard to play. It does work, but you have to like place Lux and Zyra in the front line as bombs, which is weird. But generally, if you can, unless you're really comfortable with this, avoid this one. This one's hard to play. Black Rose Crest is now banned on 2-1. You're not going to get a free Black Rose start. You're going to have to wait and get into it later. Crown Guarded now increases the shield duration by 5 seconds. This was a big deal because you would get like Crown Guarded, put 2 Crown Guards on a champion, have this amazing 4,000 health shield, and then after 8 seconds it'd go away. Really kind of lame. So now with Crown Guarded, you might actually put more than 1 Crown Guard on somebody and feel good about it. So cool. Crimson Pact. This is the Vladimir hero augment. Now the tooltip now matches the behavior, which is good. And the damage amp per cast goes from 7 to 10. So buff for Vladimir. Enforcer Crest no longer grants a Loris. The augment's especially going to be even better this patch now that Enforcer's champions got buffed and other things got nerfed. It doesn't need to also give a Loris, so it's been nerfed. Fractured Crystals. This augment was pretty bad. Automata was also bad, but even with Automata being good, as I explained, the procs don't really do that much or do that often. So the proc goes from 50% to 70%. Cool. Gloves Off, the bonus damage goes from 75% to 85%. Cool. Golemify, much like Dumbify, we have this HP per stage thing that allows it to scale. It's not much. It's not going to do much. Health is Wealth 2 now grants 5 less gold. No longer counts healing done to Dawn champs. Great. Loot Explosion. Well, when Camille is really strong, it's really fun when she's also printing 15 gold a turn. So stage 4 plus loot has been lowered by about 15%, but the base drop probability has increased a little bit. Should make it a little bit more stable, a little less high rolly. So Lone Hero gets a bit of a buff to the durability, so should be a little bit more fun. Mirrored Monetization, the initial gold goes from 6 to 2. Cool. Moonlight, the bonus stats go from 20% to 35%. Cool. Rigged Shop. I think this one's silver, actually, so this is in the wrong section. But this one's banned on 2-1 now. It was a terrible augment to take on 2-1. Pretty good on 3-2, though. So Scavenger, this is a good tempo item if you have a really strong comp. Number of items goes from 4 to 5. Cool. And then Shop Glitch, the time between rerolls goes from 3 to 2.5%, or 2.5 seconds. So you'll get 1 or 2 more rerolls in Shop Glitch. So a little bit of a buff there. Starry Night now displays the star up odds in Tooltip. Remember, those go up the higher you level. So yeah, pumping up 2% less AS. Tower defense, our poor tower, salute. He loses 25% of his attack speed, so sag. 2 trick re-enabled after the bug fix. War for the Undercity. This was a really frustrating augment if somebody else also had it. So this is now only offered to 1 player per game. And then Welcome to the Playground no longer triggers on non-combat rounds and can't appear if any other player has gloves off and vice versa. This was a really frustrating thing where, like, you would try to apply the Vander hero augment and see somebody with Welcome to the Playground, and you're like, guess I'll die. So we're getting rid of that situation. All right, Prismatic. 4 new Prismatic augments. 3 of these are quests to get 6 cost. They only appear on 4-2. So, for example, a Change of Fate. You get a blue buff immediately. After starting a round with 60 gold and winning a player combat, those are 2 separate things, gain a Mel and a Hextech Gunblade. Task can be completed in any order. Or gain an Adaptive Helm. After you upgrade 9 champions, gain a Victor and a Jeweled Gauntlet. So you can see the totality of them is 2 full items and a 6 cost, which is pretty good for a Prismatic, but you have to do the quest. And the quest can backfire pretty hard. You know, if you take What You Truly Are, for example, which is deal 35 damage to other players, and then proceed to lose every fight because you're down a Prismatic, pretty rough. So some fun, high-risk things here to allow you to get 6 costs a little more frequently. Experiment Crown, as we mentioned, those are in. Gain an Experiment Emblem, a Bloodthirster, and an Urgot. Anger Issues has not really found a place in this meta. So the resist per Rage Blade is going to go up from 35% to 45%. At What Cost is a little too good, so just a little less XP at the start. Calculated Enhancement. Last row becomes last 2 rows. This allows you some more clever positioning. You can put people in the 3rd row. Quick Strikers really benefit from this. So, Black Rose Crown. This is the Prismatic that during PBE was the best by a significant margin. We have re-enabled it, and it grants a Spear of Shojin, but it is banned on 2-1. You can't get it on 2-1. So, Enforcer Crown, instead of granting a Loris, grants a terrible human being. A Maddie. And then Exalted Adventure has been changed a little bit. Exalted Adventure no longer grants rerolls, but instead grants a lesser duplicator on select and at the start of every stage to help you finish the adventure a little bit. So that should help. Ghosts of the Friends Past. I am not particularly pleased with this augment, but it's been reworded to state that the bonuses last for all current and future teammates. The HP has been gutted. You can see here it went from 12 to 5, but the AP has gone up. Hopefully this encourages some other uses than just give your team 1,000 plus health, but we'll see. We'll see. This augment's still on my my shit list. Going Long is now exclusive from Invested. This is just to stop you from grieping yourself. Prismatic Pipeline. This gets a pretty big nerf here. It used to say get extra loot from gold augments or gold orbs. That's gone. That's just completely cut. And the extra loot from Prismatic orbs has been reduced by about 30%. So yes, you get the Prismatic orb, but not much else anymore. This is a pretty big nerf to this augment. Still going to be pretty good, I think, but definitely not as good as it was before. Quality over quantity. This is a pretty big change that honestly, from what we've seen, makes the augment really good. So definitely consider this one. But units holding Radiant items also gain 12% health. So really good at 2-1 and 3-2 now. Use that extra health to tempo off of. Use those Radiant items. So pretty good augment. Trait Unlock Geniuses. This is the Heimer and Echo one that really didn't feel like a Prismatic. The damage has gone up, and because it's a Prismatic, you get a free Jeweled Gauntlet. So should help that out a bit. Trifecta was in a pretty good spot here, but is going to get nerfed to the attack speed and the health. And then Void Swarm gets changed in Hyper Roll. So, all right, we're done with augments. But don't worry, we still got anomalies. Short version here with anomalies, again, is a bunch of the ones at the top we nerfed, a bunch of ones at the bottom we buffed. It's pretty simple. The balance of these weren't too bad, but again, if we can just sandwich it, it makes it even better. So you're going to see a lot of numbers. But here we go. Arcana Overwhelming. The bonus MR goes from 50 to 65. Cool. Avalanche of Armor. You're going to convert your armor to AD 5% better. Berserker Rage. And your baseline AD and AP is going to go up by 5. Cool. Bully. The base damage is being nerfed from 18% to 12%, but the max is still 36%. So if you're actually bullying people, you get to bully them as hard, but if they're on your level, you're going to get punished for it a little bit. Center of the Universe. The orbs now orbit faster, and remember, as they orbit, they get to hit again. So this basically allows it to hit more often, and the damage goes from 70 to 75. Cool. Comeback Story. This is probably one of the riskier buffs, and I'm just going to say it right now. If you look at the data, if you somehow were to look at the data on this one, it is the worst performing anomaly by a pretty large margin, but that's also confirmation bias because people who tend to take it are in a bad situation and then they die, and so the stats look bad on it. So right now, the expectation here is that this is going to be a pretty good one. Just make sure it's actually what you need to save yourself. But it can go up pretty high here. You can get a lot of damage amp from this one. So, Cosmic Rhythm. This is going to make a lot of people sad, but Cosmic Rhythm has been disabled. I know this is unfortunate. There are people who are like, oh, but my Maddie build, or they were looking forward to trying to get Victor with this. Realistically, we cannot let Victor have this anomaly. We cannot let Victor cast every 4 seconds. That is not a thing that we're going to allow. That being said, we do think this one will be back. We'll probably change it to be something like gain 25% of your mana every second. You can't gain mana any other way. That way it won't work on Victor, but can still work on people like Maddie. So this isn't like a goodbye forever, but it is a goodbye for now. Dramatic Entrance. We like this one. This one's really fun. We like the coming back in and stunning. That feels good. It was a bit too much bonus health, though, so we upped the stun duration but lowered the health. Cool. Fireball is just going to do a little bit less damage. Fireball was pretty good. Fortified is going to take 1 extra second per stack. Cool. Hardened Mind, 10% more bonus armor and MR. Heavy Hitter, we're lowering the cooldown on this, so you can still hit hard, just a little less or a little more often. Kill Streak, 5 less mana per kill. This one was really good. Laser Eyes, the AP ratio goes up quite a bit, so hopefully some cool Laser Eye builds. Legacy of Shurima, 10% more bonus health. Mage Armor, 10% more AP to defenses. Magic Training, 5 less bonus AP or base AP. It's only the base, though. You still get a bunch from casting, so it just slows it down a little bit. Nothing Wasted. This one is probably the most controversial. It's a big nerf here, 100% to 70%. That being said, it's probably still kind of busted. The big thing to note about Nothing Wasted, if you don't know this yet, is the way it works is when an ally dies, you gain 100% of their mana. So if an Alawi dies at like 100 out of 120, you gain 70 mana. And in addition, it works like Mana Zane where it's stored. So what can happen is, like, let's say your whole front line dies and you get 400 mana, you'll just cast 4, 5, 6 times. So this one's really good, and it might need more, but that's why we're swinging so heavily on it. So, yeah. 1,000 cuts. This is a bit of a Kog'Maw nerf. It was one of his better ones. Just a little less true damage per auto. Cool. Power Absorption. This looks red, but is technically like mixed red-green. The number is going up, but the bug fix is a pretty big change here. Absorption AD is no longer multiplied by other percent sources of AD, which caused a lot of really weird issues. That being said, we're going to buff the AD absorbed from 5% to 9%, so should help. Yeah. Protective Shielding, this is another one that was really, really good that a lot of people struggled to know that was good. But the percent HP share and the shield duration was really high, so this one's been nerfed. Scuttle Familiar, a lot of the bugs have been fixed around it, and we gave it the benefit where it'll clear Shred and Sunder before calculating the armor and MR of the crab. But to compensate for that, it does need a bit of a nerf. So it goes from 111% to 100%. Hopefully this is now finally playable with all the bugs fixed around it. Share Your Energy, this gets buffed. Because of it's actually pretty over budget now, but the positioning griefing is pretty costly. So that's going to get a buff. Slime Time gets a pretty big buff to the AP ratio here. Slow Cooker, this number should be red. This is a nerf. The max health damage goes from 4% to 3%. So pretty big nerf to Slow Cooker, but from what we've seen on PBE, it's still quite good. Titanic Strikes gets a bit of a buff here to the cleave damage. And then probably one of the biggest nerfs here, Ultimate Hero, now has a 3-turn delay before the unit becomes 4-star. This actually gives us, if it's still too strong, it'll end up being a 4-turn delay or a 5-turn delay. But it is going to be nerfed here. It was the best performing augment by a pretty significant, it was just way over budget. So way over budget to be 4-star. And yes, it only works on 1 cost, but even for 1 cost, it was just over budget. So slowing it down. And then Wolf Familiars get a buff. So cool. All right, on to bug fixes. We fixed lots of bugs. I'll be honest with you, they might not all be listed here, but we fixed lots of bugs. Typo fixes for a bunch of tooltips. I'm not going to read them all. We fixed a lot of typos. Perfected Flesh Ripper's revive effect is no longer nullified by executes. Cool. Flesh Ripper now correctly procs on away boards. Great. Scion no longer leaves behind his chain roses when updated quickly. Is this a visual bug? Jace will now only revive his Hextech Forge if combat is still happening. Cool. Clones summoned from Experiment Emblem Experiment bonus no longer deal player damage. Great. Spears will augment now works on form swappers. Great. Quality over quantity now returns the correct quality of item when consumables are used. Smeech will no longer freeze if he kills the enemy before reinforcing on double up. Support Mining and Support Mining Plus will no longer potentially prevent combat from ending. Another Anomaly will no longer create ghost items. Rumble no longer becomes monolocked for the rest of combat after gaining 200 mana at once. Loris will no longer dash to unintended locations before his shield bash. Akali will no longer freeze if she kills the final unit before an enemy double-up partner reinforces. Removing Trickster's Glass on a unit standing in a cloning facility hex will no longer create clones. Melee Jace will no longer permanently delete units who are unmovable. If you ever lost your Vander, this is why. Melee Jace no longer deals unintended damage to CC immune targets in rare situations. Form swappers received from Pandora's Bench now correctly transform. Scuttle Familiar no longer gains the incorrect amount of health from Chem Barons equipped with legal items. Champions with Scrap Emblem and Recurve Bow who don't have a completed item that builds from Recurve Bow in their recommended items now correctly generate a lucky item. Smeech with a Scrap Emblem now correctly generates lucky items while holding a Giant's Belt. Scion from Black Rose 7 will no longer fail to revive against Scion from Black Rose 5. This one, it says, is fixed, though I saw it happen to Frodan. I'm a little... It's either PBE didn't deploy or this one didn't actually get fixed, so be aware of that. That one might not be fixed. Academic research properly removes invalid items such as mana items on monolith units and unique items. 2-Trick no longer can constantly spawn. Yep, we talked about that. Pair of Fours correctly only applies when exactly 2 4 costs are fielded. Quality over quantity shows the correct inventory after an item is removed or reforged. Starring up a unit with an Academy emblem no longer gives incorrect damage, amp, and health for 1 round. Trait Unlock Sisters grants Vi attack damage and Jinx attack speed instead of vice versa. Tomb Raider can no longer drop emblems. Garen's dance animation now correctly loops. That's a massive one. Will change the meta. Be aware of that one. Health as Wealth can no longer occasionally trigger twice. Cooking Pot properly is no longer offered on Wandering Trainers. That's a big one. Dumbify and Golemify no longer cause issues with these gloves. Lux no longer fails to shield her target if they move before the missile hits them. And Experiment 7 now grants 300 health instead of 200. There you go. It's a big patch. Like I said, lots of cool new stuff. 6 costs, balance stuff. Should be even better than before. Macau being played on this. This is great. If you just got here, I can go over this again real quick. No, I'm just kidding. So, last thing to note here is as we head to the end of 2024, the way this is going to work is this patch goes live December 11th. That's on Wednesday. The Macau Open starts Friday the 13th. That'll happen. That'll be cool. And then if necessary, if we see anything, and we're planning on doing it, so it won't be an unplanned B patch, but we'll basically like, hey, we want to go into the holiday. If we have to make any other adjustments, we still can. So there will likely be a B patch the week after. Again, this is planned. This is essentially like our patch before the break. This isn't some weird failing of balance. This is just, we're keeping that option open. And then that'll be it for the year as we head into the new year. So, yeah. So there you go. Okay, that's a lot. I don't know how long I've been talking. Hopefully this video is not too long, but there you go. So, all right, that's going to do it for me. Until next time, if I don't see you on any of these videos, have a good holiday. Make sure you watch the Macau Open. It's going to be awesome. And yeah, take it easy.